right. Hello, everyone. I see the participant number increasing. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. We're going to give people a couple of minutes to come into the room, but welcome. This is our webinar about the importance of building an organization with humility with our fabulous panelists. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am a senior partnerships manager here at All Voices. And for context, if folks aren't familiar with All Voices, we're an employee intelligence platform to really systemically ask for, analyze, and act on all kinds of feedback, constructive, positive, negative, because we know that good ideas and bad habits happen in real time. We want to reduce that turnover, reduce recruiting costs, and create that psychological safety. Throughout the discussion, if you have comments or questions, feel free to write them in the chat, and we'll leave 15 minutes at the end to answer some questions. So with that, I'm going to pass to our fabulous moderator, Adele Ram, founder and principal of ARC, and I will see you all soon.
Okay, thanks, Christina. I am incredibly excited to get started on this webinar today. This topic around humility is one that is absolutely near and dear to my heart. And I know that it is near and dear to the hearts of all three panelists that we have today. So with that, let's get going. Let's start with a quick round of introductions. So maybe Will, do you want to start and introduce yourself? Tell a little bit about what you do, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Hey, everybody. My name is Will Hodling, and I'm currently the VP of Product and Platform at Franklin Covey. Franklin Covey is one of the world's largest leadership development companies. Prior to this, I started my own company, Strive. We were a management training and leadership development company, and I was co-founder and CEO there for 4 years before getting acquired a year ago.
Okay, great. Kwame, you want to go next?
Sure, Adele. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kwame Dow. I'm Vice President of People for an LED lighting solution company called Lightgear. We do LED lighting solutions for movies and TV shows. Behind me, that's actually one of the projects that we worked on, Ford versus Ferrari. And that's not real gasoline in those tanks behind me, but it could be. I've been a people person for all my life, and love human resources. Excited to be here to have this discussion today.
Great. Ali.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ali Greer. I have the delight of leading people strategy and operations at Magic Links. Magic Links is a values-driven social commerce platform where we help brands and creators grow their businesses and do good in the world through influencer marketing. I'm so happy to be here and love all the individuals that I'm on this panel with so far. So thank you, Adele, for having me.
Absolutely. And I think I want to start out actually by acknowledging all three panelists. I have the privilege, and I'm very grateful to know all three of these panelists, and I've known them for a while. And I will say they lead with a lot of humility themselves. And to be honest, that's how I actually have stayed connected with each one of you. So thank you for being here. And then let's just jump into things. For the sake of sort of a foundation here, let's start with the definition. So we all kind of know what humility means. We all have kind of varying definitions of it. So for this conversation, we're kind of using the definition of humility being characterized as a lack of false pride, genuine gratitude, any lack of arrogance, and a modest view of oneself. So kind of keep that in mind as we're going through the discussion today as our foundation for the definition of humility. I want to start with Will. I'm going to kind of hit you with the first question here, Will. As Will had said, he's been a founder and a CEO. He's been a leader in many organizations, including his own. And the question I have for you, Will, is when you think of the unique role of a leader, a senior leader, or a manager at a mid-manager level, what unique role do they play in creating an environment of humility?
Absolutely. So I think that there's two parts. I think first it's about modeling humility, and then second is about baking humility into the routines, rituals, traditions of the company. So in terms of modeling humility, so our company was a leadership development platform. We had a 360 assessment where you got evaluated by managers, peers, and reports on about 30 or so different leadership competencies. We had all of our own employees go through that leadership assessment. We had a version for individual contributors as well. And I, as the leader of the team, not only did I go through it, solicit feedback from everybody on the team anonymously, but I also once a year would share that result with everybody on the team. And we would have a kind of team-wide session 45 minutes going through, here's all the feedback that all of you gave me. Here's the areas that, you think I'm doing a good job on and a bad job on. And I would model that. And then in terms of translating that into kind of routines, rituals, traditions for the company, we had a process called 2+2-. We did every quarter. You would do a self-reflection, 2 things you're doing well, 2 things you could work on. And then you would do it for your direct report as well. And then they would do the same. So you're modeling humility by kind of talking about your own areas for improvement, along with your own strengths, and then also, sharing and receiving feedback. And then at the end of every quarter, I would write down all the feedback that people gave me, both positive and constructive. And then I would share that back out with the team as a whole to say, here's, I've aggregated the different feedback from different people on the team. Here's the 5 things that I'm going to be working on over the course of the next quarter. So kind of modeling humility at the leadership level, making it clear that it's okay to give and receive feedback and really seeking that feedback, and then baking that feedback process into your team's processes regularly.
Yeah, and Will, what I'm hearing there is a lot of modeling, and also then creating a very expansive approach to what that next layer looks like. Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
great. Okay, so I'm going to kind of shoot things over to you, Allie. So I know at Magic Links, you guys have an amazing founder who is also very humble and very, very committed to the values of the organization. And as you guys have been growing and having a lot of success, what has been one of the most challenging things for you when you're trying to maintain this environment of humility?
I think whenever I process this question, at Magic Links, I think any company, the most challenging part is egos. We all have one, some bigger than others, some smaller than others, but they're there, and they're a big challenge because it's an individual obstacle that only that one person can really overcome. You can support them in gathering the tools and the resources, but only they can overcome it. And when I think about applying that into an example, for apologies on my Slack notifications, I'll silence those in a moment. When I think about applying that into an example of maintaining it in the culture, what stands out to me is the new hire experience. And culture, in my opinion, is built in micro moments. And every new hire that comes into a company is excited to make impact, excited to do something great. And we, as leaders and HR professionals, are trusting our organization in those micro moments of that new idea that comes from that new hire to be willing to say, oh, let's try it. What do you need to make it happen? Or that's so interesting. Let's talk about it some more. Versus in an organization that maybe lacks humility, saying instead, oh, but we've always done it this way and it really works for us, and not being open to that. And I think the new hire experience is such an important component to focus on, because as a growing company, the new hires need to be exposed to that humble culture to then know that that's the culture that we have and that they're now going to be upheld to fulfilling. So an example, but ultimately it's that ego in that moment of the person receiving the idea that is the challenge. And at Magic Links, I think we have a lot of incredible people and smaller egos that I've seen at many places. But nevertheless, it's something that we all have to face every day.
Allie, what I like about that is the reality is everyone has, our egos are involved in everything. So I really like that. And I almost want to sort of frame that as, there's this kind of thing, check your ego at the door. But the reality is we can't take our ego and leave it at the door. But I think that the concept of, really regulating that is great. I also think that there's an interesting balance there for leaders with a person wants to make an impact when they come in. They want to bring all this rich, amazing, knowledge and skills that they've acquired with them into the new company. So they want to make an impact. So the reality is even as an individual, how do you come in and make an impact, but do it in a way where you're still balancing your own ego there? So I love that's right in front of the gate at the onboarding. Kwame or Will, do you have anything you might want to add to that? I saw you shaking your head a little bit, Kwame.
Well, look, I'd say all the above. I love the micro moments. That's definitely where culture's, made. But I think the ego is really the big part of it, right? So, when you're talking about an organization building culture and particularly humility, ego can certainly get in the way. And we all kind of come to things from a certain perspective. But I think organizations become great when they open up their perspective and they welcome others. Whenever we hire employees here, I always tell them, look, I don't want you to forget everything that you did before you got here,
Mhm.
because that's why we hired you. We hired you to really bring in all of those experiences and add a different eye to what it is we're doing over here. So just because we've done it this way doesn't mean that we're going to do it that way always. We want to learn from you, right? We want to really be humble and allow you to really impact our organization. And I think so many times organizations go wrong in saying, we've always done it this way. And well, it's just because, well, why? Just because isn't necessarily the answer. It's not like, when you're talking to your kid, it's, well, because I said so.
Yeah.
And even that doesn't go over for
Like a lead balloon, right?
Does not work either.
Doesn't work. Okay, so kind of leads me to the next question for you, Kwame. So when you're thinking about inclusion, how have you seen, I know you've been at several companies where you really emphasized building these places of inclusion. How have you seen humility directly impact inclusion in some very real, tangible ways?
Yeah, look, I'll go back to, where people come from, right? And your openness to really accept other cultures, other experiences. I think that's really where organizations become great, when they allow the diversity that's within the organization really to shine through. And you can't do that without humility, because, you've got your perspective and you're locked to that perspective. Look, I'll tell you, I had a conversation with one of the other executives here the other day, and we were talking about his experience at Syracuse and my experience at Lincoln University, and just how different they were, but yet just how valuable both of them were to the work that we're doing today, because we've come from a different perspective. Lincoln is the oldest historically Black college in the country. Syracuse is not, right? But our experiences, while different, were similar in many cases as well. But it allowed us really to be able to bring, the elements, to like you that we're bringing today. So it's really important that organizations just open themselves up to what comes with diversity, and you have to experience humility in order to do so. And now here's the other thing. I think there's good. There can be good and bad as it relates to diversity, but I think the bad is not even bad. So good because you're experiencing different perspectives, but bad because in some cases people can't accept those different perspectives. So you have to take those extra kind of micro moments, right, to where you see the opportunity, really seize, and really kind of talk about why it's important that we understand the other side as well. So it's absolutely critical if we are going to really take advantage of that diversity that the company.
And really thinking about even the story about the Syracuse Lincoln story, stepping back and having the humility to realize that having other people in my organization that are diverse,
sure,
it's not enough. Like having the humility to want to lean in and make connections with those people and find those sort of threads of humanity, right? That's really where the humility comes in.
Here's the reality. You can have the most diverse organization you want, but if the people aren't engaged in that diversity, if they aren't engaged in truly being who they are and bringing that to the organization, then it doesn't matter. Again, this goes back to, we've always done it that way, right? If you have a diverse organization, you have different perspectives, and we've always done it that way, turns into incredible things, incredible ways. I never thought we could do it that way.
You never thought. Allie, Will, any add-ons to that question around how it's impacted inclusion?
Oh, Will, you go ahead.
The quick one that I would say is that I think we had a lot of humility in the interviewing process, where we were humble about, recognizing our own biases and the fact that kind of we are instinctually going to hire people who look like us, who come from similar backgrounds as ourselves, and while interviewing to check ourselves and say, is this candidate actually the right person for the job, or is this the person who looks like the person who I think would be the right person for the job? And so when we were independent at Strive, I think we were 80% women and people, or no, 87% women and people of color. And I think a lot of that was because we were really obsessive in the interview process about a data-driven, competency-based, evidence-based process, and being humble about the extent to which our own biases impact our hiring process.
And I will say, I'll put a little plug in for Strive. Strive, Will's company has an incredible module for hiring bias training that they do that I think is probably one of the best I've seen. So I think that's great. Allie, did you have something you wanted to add there around?
What I was just going to add for us here at Magic Links, I think in the realm of inclusion, there's been so much that's happened over the past 2-3 years with pre-COVID, COVID, Black Lives Matter, just so many things that have been happening. And I think there's a component of humility, of being willing to learn something and then relearn it, learn it again, or realize you didn't quite learn it right the first time, and like really being kind with yourself in the process. And so in order to create that inclusive process, you have to exercise the humility to be willing to learn over and over again as we like really break down biases or old ways of being that we've held on to for so long, or might not even be aware of. So that's what I was going to add.
Yep. Okay, great. Let's go to you, Will. Let's come back to you, Will. So again, thinking about the 87, I think you said 87% rates, all the things that you built there at Strive. What were some of the not so obvious benefits that came out of building an organization with humility for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so far the conversation has been around humility and how that leads to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the kind of culture that it creates, which I think is really important. I also think that humility is essential to building a great product, right? That a lot of product development is building a vision or a mental model for the world, and then constantly incorporating data from your users, from your sales process, from your customer success teams, et cetera, that either validate or invalidate that view of the world, that mental model you have. And so I think that having humility means being curious and being open to admitting you're wrong. I think that it's actually funny, the first time that we built Strive, when I originally launched it, we were different than a management training leadership development platform. And I had a very strong vision for what I wanted the product to be. And I felt like as a founder, CEO, I should be like Steve Jobs and be like, this is our vision. This is the only thing we're building. We didn't listen. I wasn't humble enough to listen to the needs of our customers. We built something that didn't work. Our clients didn't want it. We ended up having 25 customers. We fired 23 of 25 customers in 1 week. We pivoted entirely. We launched management training, leadership development as the kind of second go of our business. And the second time around, we were much more humble and actually listening to our clients and our learners and what they needed. So I think humility can really serve you well in product development, and I'm sure similarly in marketing campaigns and in sales messaging. And I think humility and curiosity are really kind of like two words for the same thing.
Is there anything that, when you think about that story about the pivot and the product and features and whatnot, is there anything that comes to mind that was a real big win from a product perspective, that a specific win that came out of this sort of inclusion into these conversations around product development?
I think one of the principles that we had the second time around was build things that people will use, not something they should use. And I think something they should use is like you are taking your worldview and imposing it on them. Like, you should do this thing with our product, and our clients didn't want to do it. So I think it's hard to point to a specific feature because we redid the entire thing. But I think it was a mentality the second time around was really to understand what our learners, what our clients will do rather than what we thought they should do.
Well, and I love it, going back to the definition of humility around, it's a lack of arrogance and thinking that we know what someone else should or shouldn't be doing. There is kind of an arrogance around that even mindset. So I love that too, because it comes back to, we're listeling to you, you better than anyone else.
Yeah, Del, if you don't mind, I'd love to jump in this.
Yeah, please do.
One of the first things that I did when I first got to Lightgear was I threw out our annual review process. And this goes back to what Will was just talking about in terms of listening. We reviewed our employees once a year, and once a year there was kind of this anxiety where people's like shoulders came up because I'm getting reviewed, I'm getting judged, right? So I threw it out and I turned it into a quarterly conversation. So we don't do reviews, we just do quarterly conversations. And what we do is we continue to get this feedback, and we're continuously humbled by the feedback. And it allows us to adjust how we're handling our employees, how we're approaching really building our products, because we're constantly getting that feedback. And I think to the founders, syndrome to a degree, right? If you're not listening to what people have to say, people who are actually on the ground doing the work, the company's not going to be as successful as it possibly can be. Look, as a leader, I'm the first to admit that I don't have all the answers. But the answer that I do have is finding people who have all the answers, right? So you have to be humble in that way. So again, I just wanted to kind of talk about that piece that, we totally changed our approach, and the benefit that we've gotten so far has been tremendous.
So I kind of want to jump into, there's a question I had for you guys for a little bit later, but I want to kind of go to it now because it's what you're saying, Kwame, which is really around feedback. And so that's an example of how you've sort of built in looking at feedback in a new way that was probably a little bit more humble lens. I know Ali and Will, you both have sort of lots of mechanisms for feedback. Will, you talked about at the very beginning, one of them. How else have the rest of you built feedback into the organization, and how do you take this aspect of humility into the way that you are incorporating the feedback?
Yeah, so here's the thing. You can't say, oh, I've got an open door policy, right? But your door is always closed, okay? Whether it's physically closed or it's actually, mentally closed or what have you, you have to actually practice what you preach. So you can't say that I'm an organization that wants to get feedback from you, get that feedback, and then do nothing with it. Now, but you also have to set the parameters and say, hey, look, just because you say it doesn't mean that we're going to do it. We're going to pull all this data together, and then we're going to make the decisions that's best for the business. But I think the main thing is you have to practice what you preach. And that's one of the critical things that we've been doing. What we say, we actually do it.
Well, and I'm also hearing, if you're going to ask for the feedback, be prepared to then do something with it. I'm also hearing that there. Ali and Will, you guys want to jump in on that one too? What have you guys done around feedback at all? I mean, Will, you did talk about your process in the beginning there.
I think we have one of my favorite tools, not to overly plugging around feedback, is All Voices for a multitude of reasons. We implemented this last year, and it gives people a space where they feel like they can anonymously come and ask a question or share feedback and get a response, as well as a really, really crisp way to do a survey, which we survey not too frequently, but fairly frequently here, small micro ones to really get input from the organization around it. And with All Voices, you can do that in a way that is crisply anonymously. And so I feel like you get the most honest feedback there. And then you take that feedback and you share that feedback with the organization, as Will was talking about earlier, and be honest about what you can do with this and what you can't do with this. I think sometimes that part gets left out, and then people still feel a little bit unheard. And then the other thing that I would share is within our quarterly, we have quarterly sit downs, is what we call our quarterly conversations. And in those, there's a component where we ask employees to really clearly state to their manager what they want for them to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing. And then it's up to that manager and employee to follow through on that and check back in on that in the next quarter or in their touch bases, or set up a structure that works for them. So those are a couple of ways in which we've incorporated it using a system or a more basic way. And then I have something else I'll share with you around this that I think impacts it, but I'll share it a little bit later.
Okay, great. I want to add on, I kind of, after hearing the three of you, I want to add one thing on that. I also think that thinking about sort of this idea of, in order to give feedback and especially receive feedback, you have to start from a place of humility. In order to be open to someone giving me the feedback, I have to start from a place where that ego is, kind of regulated. And one thing I know, there's a lot of people on this call that are HR leaders and somehow work in the HR space. And oftentimes this aggregate feedback, to your point, Ali, comes through a tool like All Voices or an anonymous employee survey or whatever internal tools you do. And oftentimes that HR person, the HR business partner, you know, the CPO, whatever, employee relations specialist, whatever the role you play is, oftentimes they're the person that is kind of sitting with the responsibility of taking all of this information and then coming back and providing feedback to the CEO, to the executive team, to whomever, so that some action, hopefully a behavioral change happens. And one thing I think we haven't done a great job on as a group of professionals is ensuring that our HR business partners and those people in those roles are fully equipped to know how to take the feedback and then influence those decisions. And so oftentimes they can get in a situation, they're presenting the information, and then if it doesn't go anywhere, there's disappointment, right? And I do think that that's something that I would encourage all leaders on the call to really think about, putting some actionable things in place so that those people that are feedback aggregators have the skills to be able to influence what then needs to happen out of the feedback. I don't know if that resonates with the three of you, but I think that's something that I found when I was an in-house CPO.
No, I think you're right, and I think this is where the proper expectation needs to be set. Because if you're not going to do anything with it, then don't do it, because you're actually going to have more of a negative result on the organization than a positive one. Because then it's going to be, oh, it's the same old thing, you know. And you see this across organizations. Well, they ask for this, but they don't do anything with it, and it only sends your organization in the wrong direction. You know, one of the things we did fairly early on was also, got feedback on, which is an interesting one, compensation, right? Wanted to find out, just a simple question, if our employees felt as though they were being paid fairly. And now that's it could be a dangerous question to ask. But one of the things that we knew was that we wanted to make sure that we treated our employees differently than other organizations did. We wanted to make sure that they understood the value of it. Now, we know here in California, or wherever you are, well, California here, $15 an hour, right? So we realized, though, that was not a living wage. Here in California, it's very hard to live on that way. So we took the feedback, we listened to what our employees said, and we put in a like-year living wage of $20 an hour. So no employee at our organization makes less than $20 an hour. And the only way that we were able to do that was we had to listen. And then we figured out, obviously, the business case to do it. And again, the production that we're getting out of our employees is just so much different, because we asked, we listened, and we acted.
Right. And many would argue that that's not always feasible for some companies from a revenue perspective, but it's a heck of a lot more expensive to lose people and have unhappy employees than sometimes waves. I'm seeing Will's head nodding and Allie's head nodding, but I think there's some agreement on that statement.
And Adele, I want to add something too. I feel so passionately about, I'm so happy you raised this, because being in our positions and influencing sometimes is the hardest part of our jobs. It varies from company to company, executive to executive. But something I found useful to just share something with those that are here on the call is going with a plan, a recommendation, and options. I've worked with some incredible leaders, and I've worked with some leaders where it's a little bit harder to influence them, to kind of hear the feedback, and it might be hard for them to even really hear the feedback. And so coming in with a plan of what we could do, and then options also to go with that, generally has a better result. And sometimes it's like they choose maybe not my favorite option at first, but after a couple of conversations, they then meld into the better direction. And so it's just being a little tender, taking time, and being strategic with the follow-up, I think goes a long way, just to try and give something practical around that, because it's so important.
Yeah, it really is. The options, I think, also make a level playing field, so that the person that is, and Will, when you're a CEO, obviously you're in this role a lot, where it actually puts you in a humble place, because now you're working together. You're working together to solve something. Yes. You're having a conversation around, okay, let's look at our options together.
Yes.
And that is, you're coming from a place where, again, that ego isn't involved in the conversation. I want to switch to another question.
Sorry, if I just make one more point there. So, I think we've got a responsibility as HR professionals really to make sure we influence our CEOs. If we're not doing that, we're truly not doing our jobs. I'll tell you, before I took this role, I said to Mike, our CEO, I said, look, we're not always going to agree, but we're going to get to the best possible solution for the organization. And the best possible solution isn't you saying, hey, I want to do this, and we do it. It's a combination of the things that we're both saying to get to the ultimate solution. So we have a responsibility that we have to dig in and provide those recommendations, provide those solutions. You're not always going to win, but if you don't shoot, you're never going to score.
Yeah. So I'm going to put a question out to all three of you, and maybe I'll start with you, Will. We sometimes can unintentionally do things that are counterproductive to what our goals are. And so when we think about humility oftentimes gets rolled out as a value, or it's embedded in a definition of some other value within a company. What are some of the things that you have found have unintentionally been counterproductive to building a culture of humility? Or what have you seen can be counterproductive?
Ooh, that's a great question. I might actually, I want to think a little more about that one. I might defer. If anybody else has something that they can think of that's counterproductive to building a culture of humility. The thing that immediately comes to mind is celebrating internal wins, but I tend to think that organizations celebrate them far less than they should. So that's like the media thing where I'm like, okay, we have a channel, for example, weekly DApps, where people can go in and express gratitudes on Slack. And, for somebody else, somebody's job that's above and beyond. And so I can imagine a world in which that creates a culture of, false arrogance, but I think that people generally give far too little praising feedback. So that's not the right one.
We found, I'll say Allie and I worked a while together at another company, and that particular company, Textile, I think they did a fantastic job of celebrating team wins. And we would have these formal celebrations on our quarterly all hands or whatnot. That's pretty common for a lot of companies. And those really went a long way, because it wasn't recognizing heroism. We weren't recognizing an individual that tanked a project and they sort of became the hero. We were really saying, Allie, what was I can't remember the name of the award we gave, but teams were recognized. And I remember some of the teams did some really Herculean work, and they just felt amazing to be recognized by their peers. And I think those small group recognitions can go a long way.
Yeah, I think one of the other things is, I'm sorry, Allie, did I cut you off?
You go ahead.
Okay. I think one of the things that's important is that you actually recognize the work versus recognizing the event, if that makes sense, right? So
Love that so much.
I love that too. It's great. Can you elaborate a little bit more on a? Yeah.
So what I mean is, if you're working on, what we do is, again, we build LED lighting solutions for movies and TV shows. So we're just launching our new product, Auroras, which is kind of taken our industry by storm. Everyone's like super excited about it. And we've been spending time really celebrating kind of the work that it took to get there. All along, we've been, going through kind of all the gates in terms of the product development, but really kind of taking the opportunity to celebrate all of that hard work that led to us winning, best in show, one of the recent trade shows that we were at. So I want to make sure that we're always celebrating the work that's being done versus just kind of, oh, well, it's Friday and we're just going to celebrate because it's Friday. Guess what? There's Friday every week. Mm-hmm. There's not a new product that you've, put your heart and soul in, that you're going to, turn on the next, big Marvel movie and it's lit well because of the work that you actually did. So celebrating it and tying it to the work that's being done.
And what I'm hearing there, Kwame, is you're celebrating you're making sure that you're focusing on the celebration of the how, not just the what. So that how is where humility, like you keep building into, are we operating in a way where there's humility it's not just that the light bulb went, the light went on, right? It's that how we got there is actually as important. I love that. Amen to that. I see that in the comments. Amen to Kwame. Allie, were you gonna add to that?
I think Kwame hit the nail on the head. I think this is a great one for us to sit with. Yeah.
There's one other thing on this one about counterproductivity, and it is a little bit of Pandora's box. So I'm not going to go down a huge rabbit hole, but I want to throw this out there for the people that are on the call. Titles can oftentimes, what I have found is titles can very quickly become counterproductive to humility. And it is a difficult thing to figure out. I don't think anyone has figured this out with the magic bullet, but I know as founders, as CPOs, as everybody, it is a constant struggle of what's the appropriate titling system where people feel recognized, their promotions are accurate, their scope of responsibilities are accurate, but you're not getting into this really hierarchical, place. And I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on that, but I think that what I've seen has helped work in some companies is when the CEO kind of comes in with a voice on, this is our philosophy around how we think about titles. And I think that's really helped a lot in some of the cultures I've worked in. And I think it's really been counterproductive in some of the cultures I've worked in where those leaders are really tied to their own titles because it then permeates everywhere. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. It's a big one. Like I said, that's Pandora's box.
So
Look, all of us.
All everyone
I was gonna. Well, you came off mute. You're.
Yeah, it's a big one. I think that the thing is, I see a lot of heads nodding that it can be counterproductive.
So I got advice early on in Strive from a friend of mine who was a founder, who said basically titles are a huge crutch where it's going to help you early on and it's going to hurt you later on. And so it'll help you when you're an early stage startup. You need to do everything you can to recruit talent. And so you give, somebody who just graduated from business school a VP title because that's the only thing you can do to convince them to join your 10-person startup. And then all of a sudden, everybody wants to be a VP. And 5 years later, you've scaled. And now you have like SVPs and EVPs and C-level. You have this crazy inflated system. And everybody's thinking about hierarchy and whatnot. And so I don't have a good answer. I think Adele, what you shared is the right thing. It's a very complicated topic. I do think there's something to giving people a title that they can feel proud of. I know some companies like Stripe, for example, doesn't give titles, generally speaking. And I think people like to feel proud. Their identity is tied to their work in many ways. They want to feel proud of what they do, and a title can help with that. But I think you're right that it also can create internal conflict and kind of jockeying.
Well, and a little bit of going back to Kwame's point, if we're recognizing and valuing the work, the how, the titles become less important, right? So like if there is an element of all of these things are so integrated together. I'm checking the time here. I want to make sure that we leave enough time for Q&A. So I have a couple more questions for the group. The first one is the next one is really around some practical things. So Allie, I know that you guys have done a lot at Magic Links. Each one of you guys have done a lot of things. What are some of the practical things and intentional things that you think that people can do that are sort of low-hanging fruit to help continuously create humility in an organization?
Well, I'll share one within like self, because we all need to be exhibiting the behavior, and then one for organization. So it's a good question for me because sometimes I can be a bit of a know-it-all about certain things. My husband would attest to that at home. But I think that there's a component of not taking it so seriously. I mean, like even like our energy on this call, like this is a serious, warm, heartfelt topic that's so tender, but we cannot take ourselves too seriously, and we have to leave a little room for the ego. I thought of an example of myself where I had a moment where I was like, we're back from an offsite. I'm adding all the structures to make things happen and get to our goals. And I got some feedback that I needed to chill out. And it was, in the safety of an executive meeting, and I reacted to it. For those HR professionals on the call, you may feel sometimes like, I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. And you're just knocking down all this great work I'm doing. But in reality, my work is meeting the organization where the organization is. And so I pivoted and corrected. But where this comes in of giving the ego a little room and follow up our CEO, he said, that's the first time I've really seen you react strongly, Allie. And I acknowledged it, and we talked about the pivoting. And then in our next leadership meeting, I apologized for being in my reaction and being in my ego, and expressed appreciation to them for giving me the safe space to do that. And for them to call me on it next time when I'm in the reaction. But the practical thing I think folks can take away of what I started doing with my CEO then is sometimes when we're in conversations and I'm getting that feeling of like, oh, I'm trying, but I'm not quite meeting the organization where they are right now. I say, can my ego just have a minute? And I let my ego roll, and then I go into the higher self and I show up, in the humble positioning. And so it's just being playful with yourself and playful in the organization. I think one of the not so obvious benefits that show up for me with humility is laughter, right? It's like willing to laugh at yourself sometimes. And then as an organization, I think we talked, Adele, you were sharing some awards that we've done of like celebrating our wins. And if you look at Magic Link's Glassdoor, you'll see a lot of feedback about how we celebrate failures here, which is a pretty popular thing in the tech industry now. But when I started at Magic Links, there was feedback that people really weren't wanting to nominate people for failing. It just felt funny. And so we adjusted that award to actually being the Fail Forward Award. And the focus isn't on the failure, the focus is on the learning. And we have a quarterly success of the quarter and fail forward of the quarter. And always ends up, we have one success of the quarter that we're celebrating and acknowledging for an individual specifically, and then like 3 fail forwards that we end up rewarding and acknowledging. And it goes a long way of instilling into that culture the idea of it's okay to fail, just do it forward, like learn from it and go forward. It's in one of our values, forward always, as well. So that's those are a couple of, I think, practical ways to embed it.
And I also love, I go back to our original definition about genuine gratitude, a lack of arrogance, modest oneself. What you talked about even in your own self-catching yourself was, I was grateful to my teammates for giving me feedback, right? And then I also loved can my ego have a moment? Yeah. Can I take that as my nugget from this conversation? Is like, okay, right? I also want to acknowledge in the chat, there's a really good comment from Missy Bright around some really good thoughts around how to think about titles. And I think it's a great point she's making. So if you guys have a chance to see that chat. Kwame or Will, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
No, I thought Allie obviously, hit it out the park. I love being on this panel because you see me like reaching over, I'm jotting down a number of things. I'm getting some nuggets myself.
Okay, so I want to have the last question is just like, what is something, if you could have a call to action to tell your CEOs or your CPOs or whatever the people are on this call, the role they play is, what is something that is very practical that you would give as advice to the people on this call of what can you do to help create humility in your organization?
I'll start off. And it's what I tell Mike all the time is let's continue to put ourselves in other people's shoes. All right. Let's think about the person who is assembling our product. Let's think about the marketing person who's marketing our product. Let's think about the engineers who are designing the product, right? And then let's think about what kind of overall organization we want to build, because we're in a unique position where we're able to actually build our own ecosystem, if you will, or what have you. It can be whatever we want it to be. Yeah. And if we put ourselves in other people's positions, then what will be is certainly great. So I'm thankful to be an HR professional. It's what I love to do. And being able to influence culture and organizations in this way is great. So
and I'm hearing there a lot of it's the empathy, like putting yourself in the other person's, like absolutely really leading with empathy. Allie, Will, any adds there? Words of advice to the folks on the call, and then we'll go into Q&A.
I have a crisp call to action. It is water the plants. One morning I walked in and our CEO was watering the plants. We have a lot of plants here at Magic Links. And immediately his approachability was obvious for me, for any coordinator or manager or person who walked in after me. And I think as leaders in humility, it is your job to create the environment for the garden, to water the plants, to sow the soil, and to watch it bloom and become beautiful. So don't think you know it all, get out of the way and just water the plants is what my ask is.
Okay. Will?
I was gonna have an answer, but that's too good to end on.
So
I'm
good,
gonna-
right?
That's perfect. That's amazing.
It's like,
Yeah, what she said, for sure.
can my ego have a moment and water the plants, right?
I love it. I love it.
Yes. Okay, so why don't I open up Q&A? There might be some questions out there. While we're waiting to see if there's any questions out there, a couple things that come to mind. I'll just say it's just so nice and refreshing that we're having this conversation about this topic. I think about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and what the conversations were about in leadership, and it was all about drive for results and, you know, the bottom line and lean management, and everything was as wonderful and as important as all those, you know, those attributes are for leaders. It's just, this is just, we've evolved so far in the conversations we're having and talking about humility, because that certainly wasn't a primary topic, you know, not that long ago. So it's just, it's nice to be here. Okay, so here we go. What is your, and I'll go ahead and read this. What is your advice for working for an egotistical CEO who thinks they are humble? So what I would kind of say there, and I think everybody jump in, is like, sometimes our egos can come across as, it can come across as ego, and what it really is an intense personality, right? So you have sort of these strong personalities that gravitate oftentimes to these CEO roles. I know I've worked for some incredibly strong CEOs over my career. And I think I would like to kind of throw that to you guys, because we've all been there, right?
Yeah, so yes, we've all been there. And, you know, I think what I've done in those situations is I've given examples. So, you know, where the CEO feels as though, you know, he's exhibiting really strong humility, or she is exhibiting really small humility. See how I switched that up to protect the names of the innocent? Is give them examples of where they're not, right? And then on the other side, give them examples of, actually, in this case, this is what you actually should be doing, but you didn't do in this particular situation. So giving them I'm really big on examples, and also setting the expectation that, look, if we're going to make it really work, we've got to be able to tell each other the truth. So I'm telling you the truth, whether you want to accept it or not. I'm going to continue to tell you the truth.
Courage, like that takes courage. That conversation takes so much courage, right, Kwame?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, when you think about advice working with this, difficult or challenging CEO, get in there and be courageous, right?
And that's our
heart
job.
full of love, courageous with a heart full of love.
Right. Heart-centered leadership, right?
Another
Okay, so I'm going to move to one of the other questions that came through, and I really like this one a lot. For those who are in their first HR job, or kind of more of an entry level kind of HR job, what are some things that they can do to help improve and increase humility within a culture when they're not obviously having that direct exposure to sort of that executive level?
I mean, I think what stands out to me to this one is just immediately modeling the behavior. There's systematic ways to do things, and then there's ways to do things. Like I said, culture is built in the micro moments. Once one person sees your behavior, it starts to break down ways of being, and then the consistency of you showing up in that way. Consistency is so important, I think, goes a long way. I'm not sure of the structure of your company, but I hope that there are feedback avenues you can go through, setting up time to have a conversation with your CEO, even if they're far removed from you, is something that everyone in many companies today has the opportunity to do, or the leader of the organization that you work with. I think in today's culture, that opportunity to sit down and leverage the open door policies that we put out into the world is something not enough people take advantage of. And if you get told no, try again. If you get told no, try a different leader. If there's a specific idea you're wanting to implant. But besides that, to me, it's modeling the behavior. And it is, what's the word I'm looking for? Contagious. People will catch it for sure. But Kwame, I see you want to give some as well, please.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, and again, not understanding the structure of your organization, but if you have a manager, an HR manager or a director that you report into, the first thing that I would do is I'd ask that person for mentorship. A lot of times, when we're asked to mentor, one, it feeds our ego, right? It means somebody is actually interested in us helping to shape them. But the great thing about mentorship is that it goes both ways. So you will actually have the opportunity to really influence that mentor also by doing all of the things in terms of modeling the behavior. So ask them for mentorship, and again, engage in that way so that it goes back and forth.
Anything you want to add, Will? On this one, what I would say, a really practical thing you can do when you're in an entry level, sort of more of the earlier stage career HR jobs, what I would say is you guys are often the closest to the work. I mean, you are in it, like you are in the details. You go back to, you're building the products, you're building the solutions, you're writing, whatever document is going to go into those performance tools or those learning tools. So in many ways, you almost have some of the best viewpoints of the work, and there's a lot of contribution there. So I think any little place where you can build these micro sort of tools where there's humility built into it, those are places to make suggestions. And I think that you're oftentimes the closest to the work to create humility within the actual tools and products. I don't know if that helps a lot, but I think that that's really real. The last one I want to hit here is how, as a company that really embodies the value of humility, can we promote our company culture to our candidates without appearing arrogant? I love that. I'm going to actually start with Will on this one because he talked earlier about, so much of the hiring process. So again, Will, how can you sort of build things into the hiring process around humility without actually coming across, ironically, as arrogant? You're on mute, Will.
You would think 2 years into using Zoom. We put together for all of our roles actually like a pretty detailed hub on a site called Notion, but I think you can do it, maybe in your existing ATS or elsewhere, where we have a section on there where we talk about our company values. And I think it's important to kind of show what those values are up front. What our first value is slope, not intercept. And it's about, we care about people's slope in their life. So what is their trajectory of their growth, not intercept where they begin. And that's kind of so it means we might hire people for positions that don't necessarily meet all the requirements. We might, we over-index on feedback early and creating that culture of giving and seeking feedback. So I think leading with your values in the interview and hiring process, I think, is a powerful way to show your humility.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on this one?
I think it almost also shouldn't be something you have to share. It should be seen and felt in the process. Like a component of what I think would feel amazing for a candidate is for there to be an interview that's set up that's just specifically for them to ask questions about the culture. It levels the playing field, and it shows that, hey, we're trying to choose you, but you're trying to choose us too. I know at the end of interviews, you often leave space for questions, but structuring your process so that they actually feel the value is a part of the process. It's not something you have to toot your horn about, although you probably well-deservedly should. And then I'd also add adding structure to your interview questions. I believe in this for a multitude of different reasons, but in the element of feeling that humility come through in the process, it is ensuring that you really have worked with your interview panel to know what questions they're asking, so that the questions aren't displaying something different than you want to be displayed about the company culture. It creates also consistency for DEI and a number of other reasons, but just trying to give a couple of things tied to how you could display it in the interview process are the things that stand out to me.
And I love that thought of, it should feel humble. I just love that, that's just, we all know what that feels like, right? When you go through someone's process and you're like, this was really great. Everyone treated me wonderful as a candidate. I felt the positive energy, and that's just really how that, permeates. I love that.
Even as small as just like checking in with them in the process, I think makes a big difference. Like, how was that for you? How was that chat? People love that, and they feel so welcomed.
I also think I want to make sure the question itself gets answered. It says here, the question was really around how can we promote our company culture to our candidates without appearing arrogant. And one thing I will say is being confident is not arrogant. So if your company is really good at something and you have something that is your value proposition, and that is what makes you special, it is not, it is not arrogant to say this is something we're good at, because you're proud of it. You've worked at it. So I think there's a balance there between be a part of our organization and here's what we're really wonderful at. That's just being confident, right? And that's different than we're the best, nobody's as good as us, we have nothing to learn, And I think that there's a way, like going back to Allie's pieces, is having that structured approach. You really can find a way to finesse that wording. Okay, we are up on time. So I want to thank the panelists so much. Wonderful, beautiful humans, all helping build humility into your organizations. Christina, thanks for having us, and everyone out there. Thank you. I hope that you got some good tools out of this today.
Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. So appreciative.
Great job, Adele. Thank you. Talk to you later.
Bye.